Well,
500
votes.
I'm on my feet. Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on this bill looking at changing some of the monetary policy settings for New Zealand. The reason why this debate is important is because the greatest challenge facing the New Zealand economy at the moment is the external imbalances. Now, what the government is either oblivious to or is trying to downplay is the fact that New Zealand is currently running a 5% of GDP current account deficit, 5% or $10 billion a year, and under the Reserve Bank projections it's expected to increase closer to 7%. This is a major problem for New Zealand, and the reason it is a problem is that there are only two ways to pay for a current account deficit. The first is to borrow more money, and New Zealand already has a very large problem with overseas debt. And the second is to sell more assets. And as people who have followed the debate in New Zealand will know, that we have sold off large amounts of New Zealand assets into foreign ownership over the last 25 years in order to cover a chronic current account deficit. If we do not deal with the current account deficit, then fundamentally we will undermine our long-term prosperity, because we will rack up more and more international debt, and we will have to service that debt, and we will sell off more and more of our assets into overseas ownership, both the land and the companies, and we will lose the profits from those companies overseas. Now, we know when we speak to actual exporters that one of the major problems that they face is around the dollar. This is both the farming sector. The most recent Rabobank survey found that the overvalued exchange rate was a problem, and it's also across the board in manufacturing, where we've lost 40,000 jobs in the 4 years to June 2012. Now, the overvalued dollar is driven in large part, but only in part, by the monetary policy that New Zealand has run for the last 20 years. And that effectively has been a high exchange rate, a high interest rate policy. And in the current context, where other countries are involved in competitive devaluations, that has created an enormous problem for New Zealand that has exacerbated their pre-existing current account deficits. And that's why it's so essential that we do something about it. Now, we've heard from the government that what people who want a lower exchange rate want is to increase the price of flat-screen TVs. And this is clearly what the government, I guess, their populist appeal against changing monetary policy settings. Now, the thing is that if we do not deal with our current account deficit, we have a long-term economic problem where we increase debt and we lose ownership of the New Zealand economy. So when the government makes short-term appeals and says to people, oh, the government will keep a high exchange rate, sure, we'll have to fund everything through borrowed money, but your flat-screen TVs will be cheap, that is the government's economic strategy. And that is their political strategy. They want to be popular by having a high New Zealand dollar so that imports are cheap. This has been the government's argument time and again around monetary policy. But we should be clear, sure, imports will be cheaper in the short term, but the way we will pay for those imports is to borrow more from overseas. Remember, our net debt is now at 75% of GDP, or $150 billion. So we'll pay for these imports by borrowing or by selling more assets. And that is the government's economic strategy. It is not a sustainable long-term future for New Zealand. That is why we need to intervene on monetary policy to bring the value of the dollar at a lower level so that our exporters can survive and compete from overseas, just like our trading nations are doing. Now, the Green Party has put forward various proposals around that. Some of them are very much in line with the bill that we have here today, which is about changing some of the policy settings in terms of the Reserve Bank Act. The International Monetary Fund in 2010 put out a paper about rethinking monetary policy, and one of the key recommendations of that is that small open economies, the central bank should target not just inflation but the exchange rate. And the reason they say that is that they recognise that small open economies like ours are vulnerable to overvalued exchange rates which undermine the tradable sector and result in dramatic imbalances building up very quickly. quickly. That is why other small open economies like Switzerland are intervening to bring down their dollar. This is a sensible bill. The government is completely out of line with international best practice in supporting completely out-of-date monetary policy. It's time to move on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the Reserve Bank